The doorbell rang at exactly 3 p.m., just as I was pulling the $200 custom birthday cake from the oven, chocolate fudge with vanilla buttercream, the same recipe I'd perfected over 37 years of making Keisha's birthday cakes. I wiped my flour-dusted hands on the apron she'd given me last Mother's Day and hurried to the door, my heart already swelling with that familiar warmth that came whenever my daughter visited our family home in Detroit's Corktown. But the moment I opened the door, something felt wrong. Keisha stood there in a sharp business suit I'd never seen before, her expression cold and distant, while Marcus loomed behind her like a shadow in an expensive coat. Even little Aisha seemed different, clinging to her father's leg instead of running to hug me like she always did. "Happy birthday, baby girl," I said, reaching out to embrace Keisha, but she stepped back, barely managing a tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, brushing past me into the living room where I'd spent the last 3 hours arranging fresh flowers and setting out the good china, the same set I'd saved for 20 years to buy. The same one we'd used for every special occasion since Keisha was 8 years old. Marcus surveyed my carefully prepared celebration with obvious disdain, his gaze lingering on the family photos covering every surface, the hand-stitched throw pillows, the polished hardwood floors my late husband Jerome and I had refinished ourselves. "Vera, this house is too much for you now," he said without even a hello, his voice carrying that condescending tone that always made my skin crawl. "You're what, 67? Living alone in this big place, it's not safe anymore." I felt my smile freeze on my face as I watched my daughter nod in agreement. This was my Keisha, the little girl I'd worked double shifts at Detroit Medical Center to put through law school, the daughter I'd sacrificed my own dreams for, and she was standing in my living room, the same room where she'd taken her first steps, where we'd celebrated every birthday and holiday, agreeing with her husband that I was too old, too fragile to live in my own home. "The neighborhood's changing, Mom," Keisha said, avoiding my eyes as she spoke. "There's been break-ins, drug dealers. You saw what happened to Mrs. Henderson down the street." Her words felt rehearsed, mechanical, like she'd practiced this speech. "Marcus found this beautiful senior community in Southfield. They have activities, security, people your own age." My world tilted on its axis. The cake I'd spent 4 hours making sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. The birthday dinner I'd planned, the photo albums I'd pulled out to share memories, the genuine excitement I'd felt about spending the day with my family. All of it crumbled into dust as I realized this wasn't a birthday visit at all. This was an intervention. "Baby, this is our home," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the sudden roaring in my ears. "This is where your daddy and I brought you home from the hospital. Where you learned to ride your bike in the backyard. Where we buried Grandma Rose's time capsule under the oak tree." Marcus pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of my living room, the dining room, the kitchen where my birthday cake was cooling. "The property value in this area has skyrocketed," he said, completely ignoring my words. "We could get at least $400,000 for this place, maybe more if we stage it right." He was talking about my home like it was a commodity, a business transaction, while I stood there in my flour-dusted apron feeling like my heart was being ripped from my chest. "We've already made an appointment with a realtor," Keisha said, finally meeting my eyes, and what I saw there chilled me to the bone. This wasn't my loving daughter anymore. This was a stranger wearing her face, speaking with calculated coldness about dismantling the only life I'd ever known. "He's coming tomorrow morning to do a market analysis." The word "we" hit me like a physical blow. We, as if I had no say in my own life, my own home, my own future. I looked at little Aisha, hoping to find some comfort in my grandbaby's innocent face, but she was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. Even she knew something terrible was happening, and the guilt was written all over her 8-year-old features. "And if I say no?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. Marcus and Keisha exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. "Mom," Keisha said, her voice taking on a tone I'd heard her use in court. Professional, ruthless, final. "We're not really asking." The room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock Jerome had restored for our 10th anniversary. In that moment, I felt the ground beneath my feet disappear. These people, my own flesh and blood, had walked into my sanctuary, rejected my love, dismissed my autonomy, and were now calmly discussing selling my life out from under me. But as I stood there, watching my daughter and her husband calculate the value of my memories, something deep inside me began to shift. The shock was transforming into something else, something that surprised me with its intensity. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman, someone who would quietly accept their decision and shuffle off to whatever institution they'd chosen for me. They had no idea what they'd just awakened. The next morning arrived with the sound of strangers tramping through my house at 8 a.m. sharp. I hadn't slept a wink, spending the entire night sitting at my kitchen table staring at the untouched birthday cake, trying to process what had happened to my daughter, to my family, to my life. Marcus led a parade of people through my front door without even knocking. A realtor with predatory eyes, a photographer snapping pictures of every room, and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as a property investor. They moved through my sanctuary like vultures, measuring rooms, discussing potential and renovations needed as if I were already dead. "The kitchen needs updating," the realtor announced, dismissing with a wave the cabinets Jerome had built by hand during the 3 months he was laid off from Ford. "These appliances are ancient. But the bones are good, and this neighborhood is hot right now. Gentrification is pushing property values through the roof." I watched from the hallway as the photographer captured every corner of my life. The breakfast nook where I'd helped Keisha with homework every night. The living room where we'd watch Disney movies on rainy Saturdays. The mantelpiece where 3 generations of Washington family photos smiled down at us. Each camera flash felt like a violation. "Vera, we brought boxes," Keisha announced, walking in with Marcus carrying a stack of cardboard containers. She'd arrived dressed like she was going to court, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look like a stranger. "We thought we'd help you start packing some of the non-essentials." Non-essentials. My life had become non-essential. I watched my daughter, the child I'd read bedtime stories to, the teenager I'd stayed up all night with when she had the flu, the young woman I'd cheered for at law school graduation, begin dismantling my existence with clinical efficiency. She picked up my wedding photo, the one where Jerome and I were laughing at something his best man had whispered, and wrapped it in newspaper without even looking at it. "Mom, you don't need all these old pictures," she said, her voice as cold as January wind. "The senior community has limited space. You'll need to downsize significantly." "Those aren't old pictures," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's our family history. That's your history." Marcus appeared in the doorway holding my jewelry box, the mahogany one Jerome had made for our 10th anniversary, inlaid with mother of pearl he'd saved 3 months to buy. "These valuables should go to a safety deposit box," he said with that fake concerned tone that made my skin crawl. An elderly woman living alone with expensive jewelry? It's asking for trouble. My grandmother's pearl necklace was in that box. The gold earrings Jerome had given me when Keisha was born. My mother's wedding ring that I'd planned to pass down to my daughter someday. Marcus was holding my most precious treasures like they were his property to relocate. "Those belong to me," I said, reaching for the box, but Marcus stepped back. "Mom, you're getting agitated again," Keisha said, and I heard something in her voice that made my blood freeze. "We talked about this, doctor. Peterson said stress can accelerate cognitive decline in women your age. Cognitive decline." They'd been to a doctor. About me. Without me. "What doctor?" I demanded. I never gave permission for anyone to discuss my health. Marcus consulted with a geriatric psychiatrist, Keisha explained, matter-of-factly, still wrapping my memories in newspaper. "Given your recent episodes of confusion and forgetfulness, we needed professional guidance on how to handle the transition." Episodes of confusion? Forgetfulness? I felt like I was living in a nightmare where everyone around me was speaking a foreign language. "I'm not confused," I said, my voice rising. "I'm not forgetful. I've been taking care of myself just fine for 5 years since your daddy died." "Mom, last week you called me 3 times asking if I was coming for Sunday dinner," Keisha said without looking up from her packing. "You forgot we'd already discussed canceling because of Aisha's soccer tournament." That was true, but only because Sunday dinners had been our tradition for 35 years. Only because I'd been looking forward to seeing them all week. Only because in my loneliness, I'd hoped they might change their minds. The investor walked back into the living room, flipping through papers on a clipboard. "Mrs. Washington, I'm prepared to make a cash offer today. $425, as is, close in 2 weeks, no inspections, no contingencies. My house, my life, reduced to a number on a piece of paper." "That's very generous," Marcus said before I could even process what was happening. "We'll need to discuss the details, but—" "No," I said, the word coming out stronger than I felt. "This is my house. You can't just sell it without my consent." The investor looked confused, glancing between Marcus and me. I was under the impression Mrs. Washington was amenable to selling. She is, Marcus said smoothly. She's just having one of her episodes. The transition is difficult for elderly people. One of my episodes. They'd turned my natural grief and confusion into a medical condition, my resistance into a symptom of decline. I watched as Aisha appeared in the doorway, her small face pinched with guilt and fear. She'd been listening to everything, and when our eyes met, she quickly looked away. "Grandma Vera," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. "Daddy said we're gonna live here soon. He said you don't need such a big house anymore." The room went silent. Even Marcus looked uncomfortable, shooting Aisha a sharp look that made her shrink back. "Did he now?" I said, finally understanding the full scope of their betrayal. They weren't planning to help me transition to senior living. They were planning to move into my house, take over my life, erase me completely. "Aisha, go wait in the car," Marcus snapped. "But Daddy, I thought Grandma should know." "Now, Aisha." As my granddaughter scurried away, I saw something in her expression that gave me hope. Guilt. Shame. An 8-year-old's instinctive understanding that what her parents were doing was wrong. The investor cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps I should come back when the family has had more time to discuss." "No need," I said, surprising everyone with the steel in my voice. "There's nothing to discuss. This house isn't for sale." Marcus's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator underneath. "Vera, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you." "Help me?" I laughed, a sound bitter as burnt coffee. "You're trying to steal my home, manipulate my granddaughter, and gaslight me into thinking I'm losing my mind." "That's not help, Marcus. That's abuse." Keisha finally looked up from her packing, her face flushed with anger. "Mom, that's enough. We're trying to do what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated slowly. "Or what's most profitable for Marcus?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with 35 years of love and sacrifice crumbling into dust. I walked to my front door and opened it wide. "Get out," I said quietly. "All of you. Get out of my house." "Mom," Keisha started. I said, "Get out. Take your boxes, your realtor, your investor, and your lies, and get out of my house." As they filed out, Marcus paused at the threshold. "This isn't over, Vera. We're trying to be reasonable, but there are legal options if you continue to be obstinate." Legal options. He was threatening to have me declared incompetent. After they left, I stood in my violated living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the echo of strangers' footsteps on my hardwood floors. My wedding photo lay crumpled on the floor where Keisha had dropped it in her haste to leave. I picked it up, smoothing the creases carefully, and as I looked at Jerome's smiling face, I felt something shift inside me. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear as yesterday. Jerome sitting at this very kitchen table just weeks before he died, organizing papers with unusual urgency. "Vera, baby," he'd said, "there's some things about our finances you need to know. Some things I've kept private, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to surprise you when we got older." I'd been too grief-stricken after his funeral to go through all his papers thoroughly, too overwhelmed by widowhood to dig into the details of bank accounts and investments. But now, as I stared at the chaos my daughter and her husband had created in my sanctuary, I realized it was time to see what other surprises Jerome had left for me. Time to find out exactly what weapons I had in this war they'd just declared. I spent the next 3 hours cleaning up the mess they'd left behind, putting my photographs back where they belonged, returning my grandmother's china to its proper place in the cabinet. Every rescued memory felt like an act of defiance, a small victory against their attempt to erase me. But it was when I was straightening Jerome's study that I found it a manila envelope tucked behind his medical journals, sealed with his handwriting across the flap. "For Vera. Open only if our family is threatened." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a key I'd never seen before, along with a note in Jerome's careful physician's script, Safety Deposit Box 247 at Detroit Savings and Trust. "Everything you need is there, baby. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive, but some gifts are better discovered when they're needed most." The bank was a 10-minute drive from the house, and the whole way there, my mind raced with possibilities. Jerome had been a careful man, methodical in everything he did, but he'd also been secretive about finances. "Let me handle the money stuff, Vera," he'd always said. "You focus on taking care of people. That's your gift." The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, and when the bank officer left me alone in the small viewing room, I lifted the lid with shaking hands. The first thing I saw was a letter in Jerome's handwriting, dated just 2 months before his death. My vision blurred as I read, "My dearest Vera, if you're reading this, it means someone is trying to take advantage of your generous heart. I've been watching Marcus Parker since the day he married our daughter, and I've seen the way he looks at our home, our neighborhood, our life. He's a predator, baby, and predators always show their true nature eventually. What I'm about to tell you might shock you, but I need you to understand. We are not poor. We have never been poor. For 37 years, every extra dollar I earned, every bonus from the hospital, every tax refund, I invested. Not in risky schemes, but in solid, growing assets that would take care of you if anything happened to me. I kept this secret because I wanted you to live authentically, to love purely, without the corruption that money can bring to relationships. I wanted our daughter to love us for who we were, not what we had. Now I see that might have been a mistake." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. I forced myself to keep reading. "In this box you'll find deeds to 17 properties across Detroit, including the entire block where Marcus and Keisha think they're renting an apartment. You'll find stock certificates for companies I've been investing in for decades: Apple, Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson, Ford. You'll find bonds, CDs, and bank statements showing accounts you never knew existed. The property management company that collects rent from our tenants deposits everything into an account at First National. The dividends from our stock portfolio go to another account at Chase. I've been building us an empire in secret, Vera, and it's all yours now. There's more, baby. I own 40% of the medical practice where I worked. I own the building that houses Marcus's development company, has for 8 years now, though he doesn't know it. I even own shares in the construction firm that's been gentrifying our neighborhood. Use this power wisely, my love. Not for revenge, but for protection. Our daughter has lost her way, but she can find it again if the right pressure is applied in the right places. All my love, Jerome." I set the letter down, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. With trembling fingers, I began examining the documents in the box, each one more shocking than the last. Property deed after property deed, all bearing Jerome's name, now transferred to mine. The apartment building where Marcus and Keisha lived wasn't just any building, it was our building. They'd been paying rent to their landlord, never knowing it was going directly into my bank account. Stock certificates from companies I'd heard of but never dreamed of owning. Quarterly statements showing dividend payments that added up to more money than I'd made in entire years as a nurse. Bank statements from accounts I never knew existed, showing balances that made my head spin. We weren't just comfortable, we were wealthy. Millionaires several times over. There was a manila folder labeled Parker Investigation, and inside were photographs, financial records, and what looked like a private investigator's report. Jerome had been having Marcus watched for months before his death. The report painted a picture of a man drowning in debt, gambling losses, failed investment schemes, credit cards maxed out beyond belief. Marcus Parker, the successful real estate developer, was actually broke. Worse than broke. Desperate. One particular document caught my eye. A loan application Marcus had filed 3 months ago, using our house, my house, as collateral without my knowledge or consent. The application had been denied, but the audacity of it took my breath away. He'd literally tried to mortgage my home to cover his gambling debts. There were recorded phone conversations on a small digital device, Jerome's voice explaining, "I hired a security company to bug their apartment after I noticed documents from our house going missing from my office. Listen to what your son-in-law really thinks of us, Vera." I pressed play with shaking fingers. Marcus's voice filled the small room, dripping with contempt. "The old lady's sitting on a gold mine and doesn't even know it. That house alone is worth $500,000, and she's just wasting space. Once we get her declared incompetent, we can sell everything and finally be free of this debt." Keisha's voice responded, and my heart broke all over again. "I feel terrible about it, Marcus, but you're right. Mom's getting older, more forgetful. Maybe it really would be better for her to be somewhere with professional care." "Professional care, my ass," Marcus laughed. "She just needs to be out of the way so we can access what should have been ours years ago. Your father was too selfish to help us when we needed it. Now it's our turn." I stopped the recording, unable to listen to any more. My own daughter, agreeing to steal my life because her husband had convinced her it was justified. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. At the bottom of the box was a thick folder labeled Emergency Protocols, and inside was a detailed plan Jerome had developed for exactly this situation. lists of phone numbers for lawyers, investigators, and what he called leverage points. A step-by-step guide for protecting our assets and exposing Marcus's schemes. Even detailed instructions on how to use our property ownership to maximum effect. Jerome had foreseen everything. Every move Marcus was making, every manipulation, every legal threat. My husband had predicted it all and prepared my counterattack. The final item in the box was a small velvet jewelry case. Inside was a diamond necklace I'd never seen before, along with a note. For the queen you've always been, even when you didn't know you wore the crown. I sat in that small bank room for over an hour, processing the magnitude of what Jerome had left me. Not just money, though there was more than I could spend in several lifetimes. Not just property, though I apparently owned half the neighborhood. He'd left me power. The power to protect myself. The power to teach hard lessons to those who thought they could manipulate and control me. The power to show Marcus, and even my misguided daughter, exactly who they were dealing with. As I carefully returned everything to the safety deposit box, keeping only what I'd need for the confrontation that was coming, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Jerome's death. I felt dangerous. Marcus Parker thought he was playing chess with a helpless old woman. He was about to discover he'd actually declared war on a queen who just remembered she commanded an army. The drive home felt different. Every building I passed, I wondered if I owned it. Every street corner, every business, how much of this city belonged to me without my even knowing it. But more than the money, more than the properties, Jerome had given me something infinitely more valuable. The truth about who my enemies really were, and exactly how to defeat them. I pulled into my driveway, on my property, in my neighborhood, and smiled for the first time in days. Tomorrow Marcus and Keisha would return with their lawyers and their threats and their plans to steal my life. They had no idea I just discovered I owned the building where their lawyer's office was located. They arrived at exactly 10 a.m. the next morning like clockwork, just as I knew they would. Marcus, Keisha, and a thin man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Attorney David Chen. I watched from my living room window as they marched up my walkway with the confidence of people who believed they held all the cards. I'd spent the morning preparing for this moment. Not packing boxes or crying into my coffee like they expected, but making phone calls. Very specific phone calls to very specific people whose names Jerome had left in his emergency protocols folder. The doorbell rang, and I took my time answering it, letting them wait just long enough to feel uncomfortable. When I finally opened the door, I was wearing the diamond necklace Jerome had left me, not because I needed to prove anything, but because queens should dress the part when they're about to reclaim their kingdom. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, as if yesterday's confrontation had never happened. "Please, come in." They filed into my living room, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. They'd expected to find a broken old woman, defeated, and ready to surrender. Instead, they found me calm, composed, and radiating a confidence that clearly unsettled them. Mrs. Washington, Attorney Chen began, setting his briefcase on my coffee table without permission. "I understand there's been some resistance to your family's very reasonable relocation proposal." "Resistance," I repeated, settling into my favorite armchair. The one Jerome and I had saved 6 months to buy 30 years ago. "Is that what we're calling it?" Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "Vera, we tried to do this the easy way. But you're being stubborn and irrational. We have no choice but to pursue legal remedies." "Legal remedies?" I mused, watching as Attorney Chen opened his briefcase and began pulling out official-looking documents. "And what exactly would those be?" "A competency hearing," Chen said, his voice professionally neutral but his eyes cold as winter. "Dr. Peterson's preliminary evaluation indicates significant cognitive decline, memory issues, and impaired decision-making capacity. Combined with your recent erratic behavior and refusal to accept reasonable care arrangements, we have grounds to petition for guardianship." Guardianship, the word hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. "And if the court grants this petition," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, "what then?" "Then Keisha, as your only child and closest relative, would be appointed as your legal guardian," Chen explained, laying papers across my coffee table like he was dealing cards. "She would have the authority to make decisions about your health care, living arrangements, and financial affairs." "My financial affairs," I repeated softly. Marcus couldn't hide his satisfaction anymore. "It's for your own protection, Vera. Elderly people are vulnerable to scams, poor financial decisions. Keisha would make sure your assets are properly managed. Properly managed. Into his gambling debts and failed business ventures, no doubt. I looked at my daughter, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Keisha, honey, do you have something you want to say to me? Any questions about my mental state you'd like to ask directly? She finally looked up, and for a moment I saw my real daughter underneath the stranger's face. Guilty, ashamed, but too far down this path to turn back now. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We're trying to help you. Help me, I nodded thoughtfully. Then I reached into the folder I'd placed beside my chair and pulled out the first document. Well, since we're all here talking about my mental capacity and financial affairs, maybe I should share some recent discoveries I've made about my actual financial situation. I handed the property deed to Attorney Chen. Could you read that out loud, please, the part about the address? Chen frowned as he scanned the document. His expression changed as he read. This appears to be a deed for the property located at 1247 Riverside Drive. That's interesting, I said calmly. Marcus, isn't that where your development company has its offices? Marcus's face went pale. That's impossible. We lease that space from Morrison Property Management, I finished. Yes, I know. Morrison Property Management has been collecting your rent for 8 years and depositing it into my account at First National Bank. You've been paying me $15,000 a month for your office space, Marcus. Thank you for that, by the way. Very prompt payments. The silence in the room was deafening. Attorney Chen was staring at the deed like it might burst into flames. I pulled out another document. And this one, Mr. Chen. Could you read the address on this deed as well? His voice was barely above a whisper. 2156 Corktown Plaza. Keisha, isn't that where you and Marcus live? I asked sweetly. That lovely apartment with the view of the river? Keisha's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mom, how? When did I buy the building where you live? I finished. Oh, Jerome bought it about 10 years ago, as an investment. He was very good at investments, as it turns out. You've been paying rent to your landlord, who pays the mortgage to the bank, but ultimately, every dollar you've given them has ended up in my account. So thank you both for helping pay for your own apartments all these years. Marcus erupted from his chair. This is bullshit. You're some kind of... You can't just... He was sputtering, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. Can't just what, Marcus? Can't just own property? Can't just have assets? Can't just be mentally competent enough to manage my own affairs? I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. I've been making calls this morning. Very interesting conversations. I turned to Attorney Chen first. David, I spoke with your property manager this morning. Turns out your law firm's building at 425 Monroe Street? I own that too. Your lease comes up for renewal next month. I imagine we'll have quite a bit to discuss about terms. Chen's professional composure finally cracked. He was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. And Marcus, I continued, turning to my son-in-law, I had a fascinating conversation with the loan officer at Detroit Metropolitan Bank. Something about a mortgage application you submitted 3 months ago using my house as collateral, without my knowledge or consent. They were very interested to hear from the actual property owner. Marcus sat down heavily, his face gray as ash. Vera, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. Just like you explained to my daughter that I was having memory problems. Just like you explained that this house was too much for me. Just like you explained that stealing from your wife's mother was somehow helping her. I stood up, feeling every inch the Queen Jerome had told me I was. Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Chen, you're going to pack up those guardianship papers and forget they ever existed. If I see so much as a parking ticket filed against my name by your office, your lease will be terminated immediately. Chen began shoving documents back into his briefcase with shaking hands. Marcus, I continued, you have 72 hours to remove yourself and your belongings from my property. The apartment, the office space, all of it. And if I find out you've so much as whispered about having me declared incompetent to anyone else, I will call Detroit Metropolitan Bank and discuss your attempted mortgage fraud in great detail. You can't just kick us out. Marcus exploded. We have rights. We have a lease. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Check the fine print on your lease, Marcus. There's a clause about criminal activity on the premises. Attempted fraud, forgery, theft, those all qualify. I could have you out by tonight if I wanted to. Mom, Keisha finally found her voice. Please, I know this looks bad, but Marcus was just trying to help. We're family. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Family doesn't steal from each other, Keisha. Family doesn't manipulate and gaslight each other. Family doesn't try to have each other declared mentally incompetent to steal their homes. Tears were streaming down her face now. I know it was wrong. But Marcus said a lot of things, I interrupted. But what Marcus didn't know was that your father saw right through him from day one. Jerome spent years building a fortress around our family's assets to protect us from exactly this kind of betrayal. I walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood I now knew I largely owned. You want to know what cognitive decline looks like, Mr. Chen? It looks like my daughter believing that a gambling addict with $500,000 in debt was trying to help her elderly mother by stealing her house. When I turned back around, they were all staring at me in stunned silence. The choice is yours, Keisha, I said quietly. You can leave with him and continue living the lie that's been destroying our family, or you can stay and figure out how to be my daughter again. Don't give her ultimatums, Marcus snarled, but his voice lacked conviction now. I'm not, I replied. I'm giving her a choice. The same choice I wish someone had given me before I spent 35 years watching you poison my daughter against me. Keisha looked back and forth between Marcus and me, her face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Keisha, we're leaving, Marcus said, grabbing her arm. Now. But for the first time since this nightmare began, my daughter pulled away from him. No, she said quietly. I need to think. I need to understand what we've done. Marcus's face twisted with rage and desperation. If you stay here, Keisha, if you choose her over me, this marriage is over. I'll take Aisha. I'll make sure you never see your daughter again. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. My heart broke watching my daughter's face crumble as she realized the man she'd married was willing to use her child as a weapon. Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Get out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for threatening to kidnap my granddaughter. Marcus looked around the room one last time, seeing his empire of lies collapse around him. This isn't over, Vera. Yes, I said firmly, it is. After he left, dragging Attorney Chen behind him, Keisha and I stood in my living room, surrounded by the echoes of 35 years of family history that had just been shattered and rebuilt in the span of an hour. Mom, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I don't know how this happened. I don't know how I became this person. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time in years, and saw not the cold stranger who'd been packing up my life, but the scared little girl who'd once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. I do, I said softly. You became someone who forgot that love doesn't have conditions, someone who forgot that family protects each other, not the other way around. Can you forgive me? She asked, her voice breaking. I walked over to her and took her hands in mine. They were shaking. I can try, I said. But first, we need to talk about how you're going to get my granddaughter back from that man. For the first time in 3 days, Keisha smiled through her tears. We? She asked. We, I confirmed. Did you really think I was going to let him take my grandbaby without a fight? Marcus Parker just declared war on the wrong grandmother. Over the next 3 days, Keisha and I worked together for the first time in years, and I began to see glimpses of the daughter I'd raised. She helped me organize Jerome's financial documents, her legal training finally put to good use for our family instead of against it. But more importantly, she started talking, really talking, about what had happened to her marriage, to her judgment, to us. It wasn't always like this, Mom, she said one afternoon as we sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements and property deeds that painted the picture of Jerome's secret empire. Marcus used to be different. Or maybe I just wanted to believe he was different. Tell me, I said gently, pouring her another cup of coffee from the same pot I'd been using for 20 years. It started small, Keisha admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Little comments about how you were getting older, how you seemed more forgetful when we visited. He'd point out things, like when you asked the same question twice, or when you couldn't remember if we'd already discussed something. My heart ached as I realized how Marcus had weaponized my normal human moments of distraction, turning them into evidence of decline. Then he started talking about responsibility, she continued. How we needed to be prepared to take care of you, how it would be selfish to let you struggle alone just because it was more convenient for us. He made it sound like love, Mom, like protection. And the financial pressure? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Keisha's face crumpled. He told me he was investing in a new development project, said we just needed to get through a rough patch, but he needed capital to make it work. I gave him my savings, everything I'd put aside for Aisha's college fund. $50,000, according to Jerome's investigator's report, money that had gone straight to pay off gambling debts. When that wasn't enough, Keisha whispered, he started talking about the house, about how unfair it was that you were sitting on all that equity while we were struggling. He said Daddy must have left more than we knew about, that you were probably hiding money from us. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had been right about Jerome hiding money, just wrong about everything else. He showed me articles about elder abuse, Keisha continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. Stories about old people being scammed, losing their life savings, getting hurt because they were too proud to accept help. He convinced me that moving you to assisted living wasn't about the money. It was about keeping you safe. And you believed him because you loved me, I said softly. I believed him because I was scared, she corrected. Scared of losing you the way we lost Daddy. Scared of making the wrong decision, and something happening to you on my watch. Marcus took those fears and twisted them into weapons against both of us. That evening, as Keisha put Aisha to bed in her old room, I sat in Jerome's study reading through more of his files. I found what I was looking for in a folder labeled Professional Connections, a thick file on Judge Raymond Hayes. 15 years ago, Judge Hayes had been Dr. Raymond Hayes, a young father whose 8-year-old son Marcus had been rushed to Detroit Medical Center's emergency room after a car accident. The boy had been dying, internal bleeding, collapsed lung, fading fast, when I'd assisted Jerome in an emergency surgery that saved the child's life. Jerome had included newspaper clippings about the accident, thank you letters from the Hayes family, even a photo from the boy's high school graduation that they'd sent us years later. Marcus Hayes Jr. was alive today because of the work Jerome and I had done together that night 15 years ago. But there was more. Judge Hayes had been presiding over guardianship cases for the past 5 years, and Jerome had been quietly tracking his decisions. Hayes was known for being tough but fair, particularly protective of elderly people facing exploitation by family members. Mom? Keisha appeared in the doorway. Aisha wants to say goodnight to her grandma. I closed the file and followed her upstairs, where my granddaughter was sitting up in bed, her 8-year-old face serious with worry. Grandma Vera, she said as I sat on the edge of the bed, are you and Mommy going to be okay? Daddy was really mad when he left. I smoothed her hair back from her forehead, the same way I'd done for Keisha when she was small. Baby girl, your Mommy and I are going to be just fine. But I need to ask you something important. Aisha nodded solemnly. Did your daddy ever say things about me that made you feel confused or sad? She glanced at her mother, then back at me. He said you were getting sick in your brain, that you might forget who I was someday. But you never forgot anything important, Grandma. You always remembered my favorite cookies, and my birthday, and the stories I liked. Keisha made a small sound of pain beside me. He said we might have to put you in a home with nurses, Aisha continued, because your brain was getting too old to take care of you, but I told him you took better care of me than anybody when I spent the night here. What else did Daddy say, sweetheart? He said when we moved into your house, I could have the big bedroom upstairs. But I didn't want your house, Grandma. I just wanted to keep visiting you here. I kissed her forehead, fighting back tears. You're a smart, good girl, Aisha, and no matter what happens, you'll always be able to visit your grandma. The next morning, I called attorney Victoria Martinez, one of the lawyers on Jerome's list of trusted professionals. She arrived at my house within 2 hours, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened to our story without judgment. Mrs. Washington, she said after reviewing Jerome's documentation, your husband was remarkably thorough. These recordings of Marcus discussing plans to have you declared incompetent, combined with the evidence of financial manipulation and attempted fraud, give us a very strong position. What about Aisha? Keisha asked. Marcus threatened to take her if I didn't go along with his plans. Victoria's expression hardened. Threatening to use a child as leverage against her mother is exactly the kind of behavior family court judges despise. Especially Judge Hayes, who'll likely be assigned this case. You know Judge Hayes? I asked. Everyone in family law knows Ray Hayes. He's got a reputation for protecting vulnerable family members from exploitation. He's particularly hard on cases involving elder abuse. Victoria paused, studying her notes. Why do you ask? I told her about the surgery 15 years ago, about Marcus Jr., about the connection Jerome had documented. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Mrs. Washington, that's not just a connection, that's a guardian angel sitting on the bench. 2 days later, Marcus made his move. The papers were served at 7 a.m., a petition for emergency custody of Aisha, claiming Keisha was having a mental health crisis and was living with her cognitively impaired mother in an unsafe environment. But this time, we were ready. Victoria had already filed our counter-petition, complete with Marcus's recorded conversations, evidence of his gambling debts, documentation of his attempted mortgage fraud, and a detailed psychiatric evaluation of me that proved beyond doubt that I was of completely sound mind. More importantly, she'd requested that Judge Raymond Hayes be assigned to the case. As I sat in my living room reading Marcus's desperate legal filing, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete confidence. Marcus thought he was fighting a confused old woman and her emotionally manipulated daughter. He was actually about to face a judge whose child's life I'd helped save, armed with evidence compiled by a husband who'd seen this exact scenario coming from 15 years away. "Mom," Keisha said, reading over my shoulder, "are you sure about this? Marcus can be vicious when he's cornered." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw the strong, intelligent woman I'd raised beginning to emerge from the shadow of fear Marcus had cast over her. "Baby girl," I said, folding the legal papers calmly, "your daddy spent 15 years preparing for this fight. Your husband spent 15 years underestimating us. And now?" I smiled, fingering the diamond necklace Jerome had left for me. "Now we go to court and show Judge Hayes exactly what happens when someone threatens our family." The preliminary hearing was set for the following week. Marcus had 7 days to prepare his case against us. We'd had 15 years. The week leading up to the hearing transformed my kitchen table into a war room. Legal documents covered every surface, and I watched my daughter work with a focus and determination I hadn't seen in years. Keisha was finally using her legal training for our family instead of against it, and Victoria Martinez proved why Jerome had included her in his trusted contacts list. Marcus hired Jonathan Blackwood, Victoria announced during our second strategy meeting, setting her coffee cup down with enough force to rattle the saucer. "That tells us everything we need to know about how desperate he is." Blackwood was Detroit's most expensive family law shark, known for winning through intimidation and character assassination. The fact that Marcus could afford him meant he was gambling everything on this custody fight. "He'll paint you as manipulative," Victoria warned me, "using your wealth to control Keisha. He'll argue you've been hiding assets, that you're unstable and vindictive. He might even suggest your sudden discovery of these finances proves cognitive decline." "Let him try," I said, thumbing through Jerome's meticulously organized investment records. Every dollar has a paper trail going back decades. Keisha surprised me with her strategic insight. "Mom, we need to prepare for him to get personal. He knows about the years I pulled away from you. He'll use our relationship problems as evidence that you're difficult to live with." Over the next 3 days, we dissected our family history with surgical precision. Every missed holiday, every argument, every time Marcus had convinced Keisha to choose his version of events over her own instincts about me. It was painful, but necessary. "I have to testify about all of it," Keisha said one evening. Legal briefs spread before her like battle plans. "About how he isolated me from you, convinced me you were declining, pressured me into believing you needed institutionalization. Are you ready for that level of honesty?" She looked up with eyes that reminded me of the determined child who used to practice mock trials in this same kitchen. "Mom, I've been living his lies for 3 years. I'm ready to tell the truth." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 2 days before the hearing, Aisha approached me with a piece of notebook paper covered in careful 8-year-old handwriting. "Grandma Vera, I wrote something for the judge. Mommy said maybe you could give it to him." Her letter stopped my heart. "Dear Judge, my name is Aisha Parker and I am 8 years old. My daddy wants to take me away from my mommy and my grandma, but I don't want to go. My grandma is not sick like my daddy says. She makes the best cookies and remembers all my favorite stories and never forgets important things like my birthday. My daddy told me grandma was getting sick in her brain, but that's not true. I think daddy just wants grandma's house. When we lived here this week, she helped me with homework every day and never forgot anything. I want to stay with my mommy and grandma. Please don't make me go with daddy. He gets really mad and scary sometimes, and one time he grabbed mommy's arm so tight it left purple marks." Love, Aisha. My hands trembled as I read the last line. Baby girl, did you really see Daddy hurt Mommy? Aisha nodded solemnly. Mommy said she fell, but I saw what happened. He grabbed her really hard when she said she didn't want to move out of our apartment. That night I confronted Keisha about Marcus's violence. Initially she deflected, but when I showed her Aisha's letter, her composure shattered. It only happened when he was stressed about money, she whispered. He never actually hit me, just grabbed too hard sometimes, left marks on my arms. Honey, that is assault. I know, tears flowing freely. I kept thinking it would stop when our finances improved. I thought if I could get him the money he needed by selling your house. You thought sacrificing me would save your marriage. I thought it would save Aisha from growing up in a broken home. But we were already broken, weren't we? The morning of the hearing, Victoria arrived with final preparations and unshakable confidence. Remember, Marcus will make this about money and manipulation. We're making it about family protection. Vera, you're the nurse who worked 40 years and raised a successful daughter alone. Keisha, you're the mother who recognized her mistakes and is fighting for her child. Wayne County Family Court felt simultaneously imposing and intimate. Marcus sat with Blackwood at the plaintiff's table, both radiating expensive confidence. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes, but I could see tension in his clenched fists. When Judge Raymond Hayes entered, my breath caught. Older now, completely gray, but still recognizable as the young doctor who had worked beside Jerome and me 15 years ago to save his son's life. Good morning. This is Parker versus Washington, emergency custody petition regarding minor child Aisha Parker. His eyes swept the courtroom, pausing when they reached me with what seemed like recognition. Mr. Blackwood, your opening statement. Blackwood rose with predatory grace. Your Honor, this case involves a vulnerable child trapped in a toxic dynamic orchestrated by a manipulative woman using recently revealed wealth to control and intimidate my client. I felt Keisha tense, but Victoria's steadying hand kept us grounded. Mrs. Washington spent years hiding significant assets, creating artificial financial stress that destroyed my client's marriage. When Mr. Parker addressed legitimate concerns about her living situation and cognitive capacity, she retaliated by threatening his livelihood and housing. Judge Hayes made careful notes as Blackwood painted me as a vindictive matriarch weaponizing money. Furthermore, Mrs. Washington manipulated her daughter into choosing sides in what should be straightforward elderly care. The child Aisha is now a pawn in this conflict, living unstably with a grandmother whose recent behavior raises serious questions about mental capacity. Victoria rose with Jerome-level confidence. Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood's characterization isn't just wrong, it's completely backwards. This case is about a woman who nursed for 40 years, raised a daughter alone after widowhood, and now fights to protect that daughter and granddaughter from an abusive man who attempted theft through fraud. Her voice carried absolute certainty. Evidence will show Marcus Parker is not a concerned father. He's a man with hundreds of thousands in gambling debt who tried mortgaging Mrs. Washington's home without consent, systematically isolated his wife, and threatened kidnapping when his scheme was exposed. Judge Hayes looked up sharply, attention fully captured. Mrs. Washington didn't hide assets. Her late husband, Dr. Jerome Washington, carefully built them like any prudent investor. Mr. Parker's claims about cognitive impairment aren't just false, they're projection. The only person showing impaired judgment is the man who thought he could steal from family without consequences. As Victoria concluded, I watched Judge Hayes carefully. Something deeper than professional interest flickered in his expression, something personal. Evidence will show Mrs. Washington isn't this family's problem. She's the solution. Aisha Parker deserves to stay with the women who've been protecting her. Judge Hayes set down his pen and looked directly at me. Mrs. Washington, I'd like to hear from you first. His voice carried warmth that gave me hope. Standing to approach the witness stand, I felt the weight of Jerome's 15 years of preparation, 4 decades of fighting for what's right, and the absolute certainty that justice was finally within reach. It was time to tell our story. I walked to the witness stand with steady steps, feeling the weight of Jerome's diamond necklace against my throat and the strength of 4 decades spent fighting for what was right. As I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, I caught Judge Hayes watching me with an intensity that went beyond professional courtesy. Mrs. Washington, Victoria began gently. Please tell the court about your background and your relationship with your granddaughter Aisha. I'm a registered nurse, retired after 42 years at Detroit Medical Center, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. I raised my daughter Keisha as a single mother after my husband Jerome passed away 5 years ago. Aisha has been the light of my life since the day she was born. I've watched her every weekend since she was 6 months old, helped with homework, attended every school play and soccer game. Has there been any indication that you're suffering from cognitive decline or memory issues? None whatsoever. I maintain my own household, manage my finances, drive myself to appointments, and volunteer at the community center twice a week. Last month, I completed my annual physical with flying colors. Dr. Patricia Coleman can provide those records if needed. Blackwood objected to hearsay, but Judge Hayes allowed the testimony to continue. Mrs. Washington, when did you first become aware of your husband's investments and property holdings? I took a breath, remembering Jerome's letter. 3 days after Marcus Parker and my daughter attempted to force me from my home. My late husband left detailed instructions for me to access a safety deposit box if our family was ever threatened. Inside, I found documentation of assets I never knew existed, properties, stocks, investments he'd carefully built over 37 years. And why do you believe your husband kept these assets secret? Because he wanted our family to love authentically, without the corruption that money can bring to relationships. He wanted to be sure that if anyone claimed to care about us, it was for who we were, not what we had. I looked directly at Marcus as I spoke. Unfortunately, his precautions proved necessary. Victoria introduced Jerome's letter into evidence, and I watched the jurors' faces as she read key passages aloud. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to understanding, to something approaching outrage. Mrs. Washington, did Mr. Parker ever discuss your mental capacity with you directly? No. He discussed it with doctors I'd never met, with lawyers I'd never hired, and with my daughter when I wasn't present. He never once asked me how I was feeling or expressed any genuine concern for my well-being. What was your reaction when you learned about Mr. Parker's financial situation? Shock. The private investigator's report showed gambling debts exceeding $400,000, multiple failed business ventures, and most disturbing, an attempt to mortgage my home without my knowledge or consent. That's not just fraud, it's a betrayal of everything family should represent. Blackwood's cross-examination was brutal but predictable. He attacked my decision to keep the assets secret, suggested I was manipulating the situation for revenge, and implied that my sudden discovery of wealth was suspicious. Mrs. Washington, isn't it convenient that you found these assets exactly when you needed them most? Mr. Blackwood, my husband was a physician who understood the importance of preparation. He left those documents with explicit instructions about when to access them. There's nothing convenient about discovering your son-in-law has been plotting to steal your home. But you admit you've used this wealth to threaten my client's livelihood and housing? I've used legal ownership of property to protect my family from a man who attempted fraud. If Mr. Parker finds that threatening, perhaps he should reconsider his career in real estate development. When Keisha took the stand, I held my breath. This was the moment that would determine whether we truly stood together or if Marcus's manipulation still held power over her. Mrs. Parker, Victoria began, please describe your relationship with your mother before your marriage. We were close, Keisha said, her voice steady but emotional. Mom worked herself to exhaustion to put me through law school. She was at my graduation, my bar exam celebration, my wedding. She's been the most consistent, loving presence in my life. When did that relationship change? Gradually, after I married Marcus. He started pointing out what he called warning signs, times when Mom seemed forgetful or repeated herself. He convinced me these were symptoms of cognitive decline that I was too close to see objectively. Did you observe these symptoms yourself? Keisha's voice cracked. Looking back, I realized most of what Marcus called symptoms were just normal human moments. Mom asking if we were still coming for dinner because she was excited to see us. Mom repeating a story because she loved telling it. Marcus took my love for my mother and turned it into fear. Mrs. Parker, did your husband ever become physically aggressive with you? The courtroom fell silent. Keisha's hands trembled as she answered. Yes. When I hesitated about pressuring Mom to sell the house, he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. When I suggested we wait and think about it more, he shook me and said I was being weak and sentimental. Marcus shot to his feet. That's a lie. Judge Hayes's voice cut through the outburst like a blade. Mr. Parker, you will remain seated and silent, or you will be removed from my courtroom. Mrs. Parker, Victoria continued, did your daughter witness any of this behavior? Yes. Aisha saw him grab me. When I tried to explain it away as an accident, she looked at me with such disappointment. An 8-year-old child shouldn't have to see her father hurt her mother. Blackwood's cross-examination focused on Keisha's sudden change of heart and her financial motivations, but she held firm. Mr. Blackwood, I didn't change my heart. I finally found the courage to listen to it again. The moment that changed everything came when Judge Hayes asked to see Aisha's letter privately in his chambers. When he returned, his expression had shifted from professional neutrality to something much more personal. Mrs. Washington, he said, I'd like to ask you about your work at Detroit Medical Center. Do you recall a young resident named Raymond Hayes who worked in emergency medicine about 15 years ago? My heart stopped. Yes, Your Honor, Dr. Hayes. You assisted my husband in emergency surgery. On my son, Marcus Jr., he was 8 years old, critically injured in a car accident. You and Dr. Jerome Washington saved his life. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Blackwood was on his feet objecting about relevance and bias, but Judge Hayes continued. Mrs. Washington, I've never forgotten the kindness you showed my family that night. You stayed late to check on Marcus personally, brought my wife coffee, sat with us during the surgery. You treated us like family when we were strangers facing our worst nightmare. Tears were streaming down my face. How is he? How is Marcus Jr.? He's 23 now, a medical student at Wayne State. He wants to be an emergency physician, inspired by the people who saved his life. Judge Hayes looked directly at Marcus Parker. My son is alive today because of the compassion and skill of the woman you've tried to paint as mentally incompetent. Your Honor, Blackwood interjected desperately, this personal connection creates an obvious conflict of interest. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Hayes said coldly, this personal connection gives me unique insight into Mrs. Washington's character, judgment, and mental capacity, all of which appear to be excellent. He turned to the court reporter. Let the record show that this court finds no evidence of cognitive impairment in Mrs. Washington. Furthermore, based on testimony and evidence presented, this court finds that Mr. Parker's petition for emergency custody is not only without merit, but appears to be motivated by financial desperation and retaliatory anger. In the matter of custody of minor child Aisha Parker, this court awards temporary custody to the mother, Keisha Parker, with supervised visitation only for the father pending a full investigation into allegations of domestic violence and financial fraud. Marcus's face went white. This is fixed. You can't— Mr. Parker, Judge Hayes's voice was ice. You are in contempt of court. Bailiff, please escort him out. As Marcus was led away, still shouting about corruption and bias, I felt 15 years of Jerome's careful planning come to fruition. Not just the financial preparation, but his understanding that kindness creates bonds that endure, that treating people with dignity plants seeds that bloom when you need them most. Mrs. Washington, Judge Hayes said as the courtroom cleared, I owe you and your late husband a debt I can never repay. But today, I'm grateful I could return even a small portion of the kindness you showed my family. Walking out of that courthouse with Keisha's arm linked through mine and Aisha's small hand in my other, I felt Jerome's presence as clearly as if he were walking beside us. Justice hadn't just been served. It had come full circle, carried on the wings of love, preparation, and the unshakable truth that good deeds echo through time in ways we never expect. Marcus Parker had tried to destroy our family to cover his own failures. Instead, he'd simply reminded us how strong we were when we stood together. The war was over. We had won. 6 months later, I stood in the bright conference room of the Washington Family Protection Center on East Grand Boulevard, watching Keisha address a group of families who had come seeking help. The center had opened just 3 weeks ago, and already we were seeing 15 new cases each week, families facing the same manipulation and abuse we had survived. Remember, Keisha was telling a room full of elderly residents, you have rights. No one can force you from your home, access your finances, or make medical decisions without proper legal authority. If someone tries to convince you that you're incompetent, that's often the first sign they're the ones with questionable judgment. I smiled, watching my daughter command the room with confidence I hadn't seen in years. The passionate attorney I'd raised had finally emerged from Marcus's shadow. She'd taken the position as legal director, and her experience with financial manipulation made her uniquely qualified to help other families navigate similar threats. Grandma Vera, look! Aisha ran up with a drawing of our house, complete with stick figures of 3 generations standing in the front yard. At the bottom, she'd written, "My strong family" in purple crayon. "It's perfect, baby girl," I said, lifting her up. At 8 years old, she was thriving in ways that reminded me daily why we'd fought so hard. The nightmares about her father's anger had stopped. Her grades improved. Most importantly, she laughed freely again. "Mrs. Washington?" A nervous woman approached. "I'm Sandra Mitchell. My son says I need to sell my house and move to assisted living. He claims I can't manage alone, but I feel fine. I just don't know what to do." I guided Sandra to one of our consultation tables. "Tell me about the pressure he's applying." Her story felt painfully familiar. An adult child convinced his mother was declining. Financial urgency around selling property, threats about professional evaluation if she didn't comply. "My house has been in our family 3 generations," Sandra confided. "My grandmother bought it when she moved up from Alabama. It's not just a house, it's our heritage. And no one has the right to take that from you," I assured her. "Let me introduce you to my daughter." Watching Keisha review Sandra's documents and explain legal protections, I felt Jerome's presence as if he stood beside me. This was his vision, not just protecting our family, but using our resources to help others facing similar battles. "Mom, we need to talk." Keisha appeared as the afternoon session ended. In my office, furnished with Jerome's desk and medical journals, she settled into the familiar chair across from me. Judge Hayes called. "Marcus is requesting modified custody. He wants unsupervised visits with Aisha." My protective instincts flared. "Absolutely not." That's what I told the judge. Marcus completed anger management and financial counseling, but that doesn't erase what he did. Judge Hayes said any modification would require extensive evaluation, including interviews with Aisha about her preferences. "How do you feel about this?" Keisha was quiet, stronger than I expected. 6 months ago, I was so afraid of making wrong decisions that I let Marcus make them all. Now I trust my judgment about what's best for Aisha. Which is stability, safety, growing up knowing her voice matters, that she can say no when something feels wrong. Marcus took those things from all of us. I won't let him do it again. That evening, we sat around our dinner table, the same one where Marcus had once tried to manipulate us into surrendering everything. Aisha was describing her school project on family history. "I wrote about how Grandma Vera saved a little boy's life, and then the boy's daddy helped us when we needed help," she said, taking a bite of cornbread I'd taught her to make from my mother's recipe. "Mrs. Jenkins says some families get stronger when bad things happen and some get weaker. We got stronger, didn't we, Mommy?" "Yes, baby. Much stronger." Later, after Aisha was asleep and Keisha had gone to review tomorrow's cases, I sat with T and Jerome's final letter, found at the bottom of his safety deposit box, marked for Vera's eyes only. "When the storm has passed." "My dearest Vera," it began, "if you're reading this, you've successfully protected our family. I always knew you had the strength to fight any battle, but I wanted to ensure you had the weapons to win. By now you've discovered that money isn't really power, it's just a tool. Real power comes from knowing who you are, standing for what's right, and remembering that love is stronger than fear. I hope you've learned that kindness plants seeds that bloom unexpectedly. That young doctor whose son we saved, the patients you comforted, the students you mentored, all those moments of grace create networks of goodness that support you when needed most. Use our resources wisely. Not just to protect our family, but to help others facing similar battles. Turn your pain into purpose, your victory into service." I folded the letter carefully. Outside, Detroit's lights twinkled like stars, and I could see neighboring families now safer because of our center's work. In 6 months, we'd helped 43 families retain their homes, exposed 12 elder abuse cases, and connected dozens of isolated seniors with legal services. The center was expanding, with plans for a second location in Flint. Marcus had tried to destroy us to cover his failures. Instead, he'd shown us how powerful we could be standing together, armed with love, preparation, and commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Heading upstairs, I paused at the family photos lining the hallway, pictures telling the story of 3 generations of Washington women who had loved, struggled, and endured. Tomorrow would bring new families seeking help, new battles to fight, new victories to celebrate. But tonight, in the house my husband had secured and my courage had saved, my daughter and granddaughter slept peacefully, protected by unbreakable family bonds. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with redemption and the quiet satisfaction of turning personal victory into lasting protection for others. Jerome had been right about everything. The seeds we plant in kindness do bloom unexpectedly, and sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the storms we survive. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.